the leadership needs to hear this. We need to know that it's an existential threat for real. And like you said, the greatest poison is the chemicals. I mean, I don't know how we can say that the agrochemicals, and it's like there is an unholy alliance between the big agri, the big pharmaceuticals, and we need to make this stand. So I hear you saying and repeating over and over that we don't seem to realize that this is an existential threat, and yet there are solutions. Yeah, going agroecological, going organic, feeding people. I tell people, eat and grow food like your grandmother did, going back to nature, linking up with the soil, appreciating that the soil and the photosynthesis is all we need. But again, perhaps before we move into the way forward in terms of solutions that are actually scaringly simple. And I suspect, and maybe you can clarify that the big industries are afraid. They know the truth, but they say, wait a minute, it can't be that simple. If we reverse diseases, if we create the soil that can regenerate, what do we do with the big agriculture corporations and the money, the millions, billions of dollars we're making? I get a sense that we're at a tipping point, Dr. Bush, where we have to we're at crossroads, and as humanity, we need to say the truth as it is. We need to agree on whether we want to sink together. And I like the way you say that Africa is the continent of hope. But guess what's happening right now? With all due respect, the Monsantos, now the Bayers and all the big agri, they are in cahoot with the genetic makers. They are in cahoot with the vaccine makers. And as you said again, this is not just destroying the soil. And you probably want to speak to that. It's also ruining the gut microbiota. The gut microbiota is the residence of the immune system. I'm just moving out towards COVID-19. And like you said, the reason why COVID-19 is ravaging the US and then Brazil in that order, guess what they are growing? They are growing corn, they're growing GMOs, they're using glyphosate, they're using huge amounts of agrochemicals that are toxic. And hey, the immune systems are already compromised because they have high rates of diabetes, high rates of obesity, high rates of chronic diseases. And guess what? COVID-19, I mean, unfortunately, is having a field day. And like you said, Africa still remains the continent of hope because it's people are still traditional, are still eating from the small farms, diverse traditional foods, rich in zinc, rich in vitamin D, rich in vitamin C, that diverse, nutrient-rich. And this is what these guys want to come and get rid of. Marginalize, get rid of agroecological farms, get rid of small organic farms. You know, I'm the CEO of Organic Consumers Alliance. I speak, I preach, I eat, I breathe. My other name you may don't know is Dr. Organic. My colleagues who are now surgeons and professors, they know, they say, Peter, when did you become a quack? And I'm saying, wait a minute, you guys are busy mopping the floor. I am trying to fix the leaking tap. Between the two of us, who really is not thinking? It doesn't make sense to be mopping the floor as clinical. I mean, there's a continuum of care. But shouldn't we be spending more time fixing the leaking tap? Because that comes from nutrition, that comes from the food you're eating. Because you are what you eat, Dr. Bush. I mean, this is common sense. And my dilemma is that these people, they seem to know the truth. Going forward, and again, you may want to touch on the gut microbiota and the fact that the immune system is resident within the gut. And if you ruin the gut and the gut microbiota from eating the wrong food and the residues of agrochemicals like glyphosate, you're not going to ruin your gut system, you ruin your mental health because the aromatic amino acids, the phenylalanine, tyrosine, and so on, they are created from the healthy bacteria. I don't want to go into that detail, but you probably want to touch on that and mention that there is a simple solution. We need to reconnect with Mother Nature. We need to allow the soil microorganisms to feed the roots instead of feeding the roots with ammonium nitrate and bomb material. It seems to be a very simple solution. Is it that there is inertia and then a paralysis of sorts that people are unable to see this? If you're talking about COVID-19 management, do you know what they start with? Wear a mask, keep social distance, sanitize. Nobody talks about nutrition, really? And I'm fighting the government right now and telling them, honestly, Really? Are you serious? When people go on home care, they go on garlic, ginger, turmeric, a lemon, and they know people are ahead of government. And indeed, this is perhaps the reason why COVID-19 isn't ravaging Africa yet. And if you see a pattern again, the highest incidence and the highest rate is in South Africa. Guess what's happening in South Africa? That's the only country in Africa that has GMOs. Yep. Are you going to say that this is a spurious correlation, Dr. Bush? There is a clear correlation with unhealthy food, weak immune systems, and of course the effects of COVID-19, of course, which towards the end we must mention, because this is a contextual issue. COVID-19 is killing people whose immune systems are weak, and those who are healthy and eating the right food. This is the message, and it's who is it? Who's COVID-19 ravaging? It's people with NCDs. Is that a coincidence, Dr. Bush? You probably want to speak a little to that, so that the audience can understand that there is a clear correlation, and it's not a spurious correlation, like you say. When glyphosate and other agrochemicals came in, and when GMOs came in, there is an epidemiological and very clearly a correlation with the sudden exponential increase in all the NCDs, from diabetes to blood pressure to autism to obesity, to a scenario where right now 1 in every 2 Americans is either pre-diabetic or diabetic. And like you said, if you continue with these chemicals, especially the glyphosate-based agrochemicals, there is an existential threat. Fertility rates are going down, and yeah, it's your show really, but I needed to repeat what you say because it's so true. I think I'll pause here and let you do the way forward. So, given where we are, Dr. Bush, what do we do since there is an existential threat? How do we go forward? How do we convince the policymakers, all these people, to shift so that we save not ourselves but our children and children's children, and basically avert the existential threat that is very apparent? And of course, COVID-19 has actually exposed the broken food system.
For sure. Yeah, Africa and many parts of India are having phenomenally good results with COVID-19. There's examples in India of provinces that have 30 to 50 million people living there and have had 20 deaths. It's like almost non-existent problem. Whereas in New York City, we can reach somewhere around 88% mortality in many of our ICUs there. So we have this devastating, lack of resilience in the United States, whereas in India, in impoverished parts of India and impoverished parts of Africa, we see almost no manifestation of this disease. Over and over again, you can map the correlation with chemical food system and air pollution with COVID-19 death.
Right.
We have never seen a better correlation of the poisoning of the soil and the poisoning of the air, creating this vulnerability in humans as we have in COVID-19. But in fact, it happens every single year around the world with the respiratory viruses and pneumonia, which are one of the leading causes of death throughout Africa. That always correlates with a rise in air pollution in the winter months and the collapse of the soil system beneath it. When we have collapse of soil and increased air pollution, we create respiratory death.
Right.
COVID-19 has demonstrated this. And as you said, all disease begins and ends at the microbiome. The microbiome is the function of life. It is the vital soil, not just outside of us, not just in our gut, but actually inside of us now. The world of genomics has demonstrated that we have bacteria, fungi, and the rest of the microbiome in our brains, in our livers, in our kidneys. Every organ system has an organic garden within it in a healthy state. And as we start to poison the soils, which then poisons our food and poisons our water system with antibiotics, herbicides like glyphosate are potent antibiotics. And as you wipe out the workforce, that huge ecosystem of the microbiome, we become vulnerable to all disease.
Right.
And in Africa, there's nothing better to demonstrate this than the HIV and AIDS era. HIV and AIDS, we can track back in the bloodstream all the way back to the 1920s, 30s, 50s in different nations. It is not hard to find HIV in the 1950s. in the blood, but nobody had AIDS.
Correct.
It wasn't until we hit the mid-1970s in the United States, Africa, and elsewhere that we suddenly see AIDS occur. We had a fundamental change in our relationship to viruses in the 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
We created glyphosate and put it on the market in 1974. We had a fundamental change at that moment in our relationship to the viruses. Viruses are not living organisms. They're actually not part of the microbiome. They're the communication of the microbiome.
Mm-hmm.
Viruses is how one organism talks to another organism about their genetic stress.
Mm-hmm.
And the viruses are methods for passing on genetic adaptation to create resilience and biodiversity. Adaptation, biodiversity. That's what the viruses do.
Mm-hmm.
The viruses are not living organisms. They don't attack us. We decide whether or not we're going to make a virus. It's one of the most regulated processes in biology, is now understood to be the ribosomal RNA that will translate a virus into proteins. That's a highly regulated step.
Mm-hmm.
We don't get attacked by viruses. We produce viruses when our body has the right need for them. So viruses are part of our environment. HIV goes back decades before it ever caused a problem. But in the 1970s, as we went to chemical ag in South Africa, suddenly we exploded it there. And then we passed that vulnerability through Africa, following the trucking lines from South Africa. That's how it spread through Africa. That's how it spread through the whole world, was ultimately trade and chemical agriculture. The movement of chemical agriculture throughout the world was the trafficking of HIV. And now we see this massive burden of HIV in the world. But if you go to healthy nations where their food systems are resilient, Asia is doing a very good job with a resilient and healthy food system right now.
Right.
And in universal screening for HIV, they have very high levels of HIV that are causing no problem. They have almost no AIDS, but they have high levels of HIV. They have a resilient immune system that's figured out how to deal with HIV. They're not on drugs. They're not on highly active antiretroviral therapy.
Yes.
They are in a resilient food system.
Mm-hmm.
In the West, we see HIV, hepatitis C, and all of this exploding since the 1990s again.
Mm-hmm.
1 in 8 men in our capital, Washington, D.C., 1 in 8 African-American men has HIV in that state. And so it's a terrifying thing that we are collapsing our relationship to the outside world. The microbiome is the resilience of biology. We are outnumbered by just the bacteria 10 to 1. Mm-hmm. So there's somewhere around 1.4 quadrillion bacteria in and around our body. Mm-hmm. There's only 50 trillion human cells. So we're just logarithmically outnumbered by the bacteria. Wow. But then you take into account the fungi and the protozoa and the archaea. There's so much life within us that is non-human that makes for a resilient system. More than 90% of the enzymatic work to detox my body, to improve metabolism, to build a resilient and regenerative system is done by bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and the like.
Absolutely.
And so we have this extraordinary reality that the human is not at the center of human health. Let me repeat that. The human is not at the center of human health. That's amazing transformation of science. That's just like finding out that the world was not flat, but the world is round. Yes. That took us thousands of years to handle that information. And then in the 1600s, with the invention of the telescope, we discovered that the Earth was not in the center of the universe. We just thought that everything was moving around us, and we were still. It was so hard for us to imagine that we were speeding through space, spinning on an axis, moving in 3 dimensions. It was so hard to imagine. We're having the same struggle now with human health. Absolutely. Our regulatory community, our governments believe that we are a 2-dimensional species, that it's humans against everybody else.
No.
We're trying to fight against the world. It is humanity not at the center of life. Life has invited us to be part of it, and we have done nothing but try to kill it. And so we need to stop trying to kill everything around us, accept our position within life on Earth, and realize that we are miraculous healing machines. From the moment we are born, we are healing every day, every cell. repair, 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 detox, repair, regeneration. Too damaged, stem cells replace you. We are regenerative machines as long as we are plugged into nature.
Absolutely.
The moment we unplug and we start to create a chemical force field between us and the world outside, the moment we decide to become an isolated human species, we go extinct. It's that simple.
Absolutely.
And so when people talk about the microbiome, I want you to picture an organic garden, a life force of plants leaping out of that soil. You want that organic garden in your gut, in the gut of your patients, to become resilient. They can develop a healthy relationship to HIV. They can develop a healthy relationship to cancer. They can develop a healthy relationship to all of the cellular processes that threaten us. Remember, we don't have to look back to some theoretical past to see a point where we were resilient. We just need to look back to the 1970s. Absolutely. In my short life, in my short lifespan, all of this has happened. It did not take, thousands of years for us to do this. It took just 30 years of chemical farming to devastate the biology of the planet.
Amazing.
And so it's exciting to me because we can heal fast.
Yes.
And so as we start to really look at resilient agricultural systems, which is what my nonprofit does now, my nonprofit Farmers Footprint is working to understand how do we create such vital soil that the plants that grow out of that have all of the medicine that people would need.
Yes,
that step of focusing on soil instead of crop production is the transformation of our nations. Absolutely. And I believe that Africa is very well positioned to be a massive leader in that. And so if you have contacts in Kenya or wherever you're listening from, South Africa, I've got interesting relationship with Morocco recently. I think that we have an opportunity to show that we can lead in this place of Africa, a whole new concept of public health. We can show that we can overcome the HIV endemic environment in Africa because of our shift in relationship to the viruses.
Absolutely.
The bacteria and fungi will reduce the amount of viral production just in their presence. And then if you put them into an active metabolic state, they can actually become part of the huge solution.
Absolutely.
We now know that enzymes within us that are actually programmed into the human biology by viruses are the things that actually kill viruses. And so we now know that it's this incredible relationship to the outside world that allows us to be healthy. It is not an effort to kill the world and therefore sterilize our human experience. We need to welcome it in. And so I try to do as much time outside as I can.
Yes,
I'm sorry if this is distracting with the sun and the waves.
No, that's
but this is where I want to spend my life because it's so important.
Yes.
This is our nature. For 200,000 years, we've been living in this nature as human beings.
Right.
For 4 billion years, this planet has been creating this biodiversity in its beauty, in its lush capacity for life. And every time it gets killed, it comes back more resilient, with more biodiversity, with more intelligence.
Absolutely.
And so Mother Earth will not be put down for long. We are killing her today. We are killing Mother Earth under our pressure of chemicals. But we can become part of the solution when we start to celebrate nature and we plug ourselves, all of our ingenuity, our intuition, all of our inventions and technologies could align themselves with Mother Nature, where we never create a product that hurts our water systems, our soil systems, and our air. We need new technology that's coming down the pike, and I'm very excited to say that the energy system is about to be radically transformed. Over the next 10 years, I think we will see clean energy in Africa, where there will be abundant free energy for all of your peoples to start an ingenious relationship with Mother Nature. But if you don't start at the food system, none of the rest matters. The transportation, technologies, all of that are not going to save the world if you don't start at the food system. And so it is critical that we move very quickly for Africa not to follow the path of South Africa, Europe, United States. We need the African nations to come together to say, we could be like Russia. We could be the most powerful food system in the world. You guys could be the biggest exporters of food over the next decade if you do the right moves. And so you could really feed the world When
Absolutely.
so long we've been saying Africa is starving, and you just went through one of the worst famines in human history in the last few years in parts of West Africa,
Right.
East Africa. It doesn't, that's not the story that needs to be told about Africa. Africa could be the biggest food producer, the biggest healthy food producer, and the
Absolutely.
healthiest peoples of the world. Very simple.